Welcome to Armchair CMOs. It's Vaughn.
And I'm Julie. Welcome back.
Jules, what's
Happy,
up? Hey,
happy
Jules.
Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is when this is going to come out. So happy Christmas Eve.
Today is Christmas Eve, but you will be watching this, listening, whatever, on Christmas Eve. Actual. So, first thing we want to start and talk about is kind of in our wheelhouse from the team sports game day aspect. Phoenix Suns announced that they have this $2 value menu that they're about to release. Jules, tell me what you think about it.
Okay, I love this. This is immediately the thought that I had about this. We Having worked in the ticket office, we used to send out a survey at the end of every season about tickets and the fan experience. And one of the number one complaints we always got was the cost of parking and concessions. Of course, renting space in Capital One Arena, we had no control over that. Um, but that said, I know that this is a big pain point for a lot of consumers, and especially at a time where most stadiums and arenas are like taking out regular seating to put in luxury seating or like fancy game day, like VIP game day experiences or more suites or whatever. It's really interesting for the owner here to be taking kind of an opposite approach and trying to make like game days more accessible for families.
Yeah, I think that's super important. So just to give context for everyone, the new menu is a hot dog is going from $9 to $2. A bottle of Dasani is going from a bottle of Dasani was 8.50,
That's pretty
going down to
crazy.
$2. Same 16-ounce soda going from 6.50 to $2. Bag of chips going from 7 to $2, and a bag of popcorn going from 7 to $2, which is like kudos to them for changing, but the prices that they were is like low key ridiculous.
Criminal, pretty good one. I'll also say like they are doing a lot of that same trend of like putting in more VIP experiences. Like they're starting like a members only club on game days. Like they're not doing that part. This is something I read like 8 years ago, and this is the last thing I'll say on the topic, but it remains true. It was called the bifurcation of retail, where there's no longer this mid-range, there are no longer like mid-range stores, mid-range prices, mid-range experiences for anything, except maybe like hotels. But for the most part, retail and like experiences are dividing into two camps, luxury and value. And so people either want to spend a ton of money and get a really luxury experience, or they want just the cheapest way to do things. And I think that you see this with this move right here. And that's old news. Like it's been happening for ages, but I think this is maybe the first like stadium to pick up on it.
Yep. And I totally like as someone who's been to a game recently, like what you just described makes sense to me. Like I would rather if I'm gonna sit in the stands, I don't wanna wait in a long line and pay a lot of money just to get basic food to go take to my seat. I will pay hundreds more dollars. And I actually like when I went to the Miami game, like looked at a set of seats that were in the club level. My family didn't want to do that. I guess they didn't want to spend the money, but I was ready to say like, hey, like this is an option. Like it's not that much more money compared to the seats that we ended up getting, which were comparable location. But like if we can go sit in a space where we can have our own 4 seats, 5 seats in a row that's away from everybody. Because like I think I mentioned this last week, we sat in a spot where there was a guy behind us who was yelling and screaming and spitting when he talked, and he was complaining
Mm.
about his parlay. Like, you know what I mean? So like if I can have this the five of us, family, go sit in our own space and we pay a little bit more money to have that exclusive area and maybe have access to some other food, like I think that's worth it. So kudos to the Phoenix Suns. Hopefully we see this as a trend across other pro teams because, as things in America get to be more expensive, if we want to continue to have people show up to these games, like we got to provide value outside of just like wanting to come see superstar NBA players. That ain't enough.
And ticket like NBA tickets are so expensive too that this at least helps. You know, you might pay a lot on the tickets, but you don't have to spend a lot once you're in the arena. Um, so yeah, okay. We both love this. We like to see this. Um, Want to move on to something that I think we and like we as the American sports fans maybe don't love as much was college football playoffs this weekend. There were a fair amount of negative reviews about the seating, about the broadcasts. Curious what you thought on before I dive in.
So I will be completely transparent. I maybe watched 2 minutes of the game on Friday because it was standalone. Um, but Saturday, we had this conversation because Saturday had so much going on. There was NFL games, there was a big women's basketball game, which we'll talk about in a second. But my day was planned on Saturday, gym, doing stuff around the house, and then I was watching the Ravens and Steelers. And then I was watching JuJu and Paige. That was it. I did not even think about. Now, I will say, like, I paid attention to the scores. I was interested in the games on Saturday because I have two of my former two kids that were at Temple when I was there. One plays for SMU. Shout out to Kobe Wilson, who's like one of the leading tacklers for SMU. He should get a shot at the league. And then my other kid, Jalen McMurray, is from PG County, Maryland. He actually is at Tennessee, D back. So like I was interested in those games only because of them. Like I had no dog in this fight, so like I didn't have any intention to watch those games. Like especially once I looked at both of them and the games were like kind of out of hand. I was like, all right, cool. I'm
Yeah.
watching the game. So ultimately, I know that we're going to talk about this conversation about the seating. And, I think it's just the first time they're doing it, they got to figure it out. Like, I think it's easy to have that
Yep.
conversation about, could you, do you want to reward people for having the best record or do you want to reward people for playing the hardest schedule? And I
So
think,
let's set this up a little. But I think you're right. Like I think the conversation at large is like this is the first time going through this. There's like a big learning curve.
right,
What Vaughn was just talking about is this seating about complaint or this complaint about seating is that there's a lot of complaints around not only like who belonged in um the playoffs, which is kind of tied to the second thing we'll talk about too, but the first thing is or this I guess the second thing is there's also a lot of complaints about like where people were actually seated in the bracket. Um, the big thing being strength of schedule wasn't taken into account, and that's what you were just talking about. There's like a few other complaints, but that was really the primary one is teams who might have been like 11-1 or 10-2, but like 10 those 10 wins were against unranked teams or whatever. So that was a big part of the complaint. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I mean, I think that's just, from kind of like a similar conversation to what we had last week about the product of the NBA and how that's kind of affected people's fandom and the way they show their fandom, and specifically from the conversation about ratings. I mean, you got to get it right. You got to figure out how to put the best product together. And, you know, I think you have a point to talk about the comparison to March Madness because like March Madness has been like the only changes that they've made is to add teams in our lifetime, in my lifetime. We're not our lifetimes are not that much different. But
Isn't the net new? Or like what is the new what's the
but that's like they
some of
haven't.
those like algorithms or whatever are new that they
But the
use.
net is more of a different way to help to pick the people in the field. I like because to your point, like it's two conversations about who's in the field and then where they're ranked, right?
Yep, yep,
The bigger
that's true.
conversation with PFP is like the whole field has changed and gotten bigger and a different like it's not just getting bigger, it's altered in a way where it's not the same as it used to be. And it's not the same as it was like when I was growing up and it was the BCS and they had the different games that, changed every year about who actually got to be the national champion. Like all that's crazy. I think big picture, the conversation is there's definitely some work to do. I do think there's a thin line between let's try to be fair and get everyone in or get more people in. Let's not just keep the people who are always in, opposed to like let's let the people in who are always in because they deserve to be in.
Yeah. And okay, I'm gonna save that thought for a second because what I want to say is I want to go back to your point about the comparison to March Madness, where like to our exact point, like you're like, oh, nothing has really changed, and we're like, well, maybe a little bit. Like there's certain things about who's in the field or how they're ranked has like maybe changed over time, but the point is like that is always kind of still being discussed, like whether that will change. So it's not easy to figure out. So like I don't think anyone expected the college football playoff to be perfect, but they definitely have to make changes and like be agile the way that like March Madness is if they want to have a better product next year. Because these blowout games, like you said, the games were crazy. Like you didn't watch them. I turned on Tennessee, Ohio State, and in the first quarter, Tennessee was down by like what, 3 touchdowns or something. So I just turned it off, like or changed the channel. Like I just was not interested in watching a blowout. Um, Especially when I wanted the balls. um, so yeah, like that, they're definitely gonna have to figure that out. Um, what you just said about the teams always being in, and like whether they have a right to be in because they are always in. In March Madness, I do totally find myself to be like a team elitist. like I'm like, like always for the blue bloods. Like I love a Cinderella story if the team is likable. But if a team is like a Cinderella story and they're getting cocky, I'm like, sit down. Like this is your first time in the tournament in 10 years. Like you don't get to be cocky yet. Um, which is the exact complaint that everybody had about the CFP and the broadcasting on ESPN specifically, where a number of the like announcers seem to have this very elitist attitude where they were like very pro SEC or very pro like those blue bloods, like always in the top 10 or like contenders or whatever. And everyone's just kind of sick of it because it's like, hey, like other teams deserved to be here, or if you're going to criticize one team for one thing, then you need to like hold the same standard to the blue bloods or whoever. Um, which, as much as I can be guilty of some of those things, I don't think that they were like invalid complaints.
Right. Yeah, I think you're like to wrap up the conversation about the field, like as someone who can speak from experience, like the changes to March Madness, like specifically the big one of the first four, right? Like I lived that with VCU. Like I wasn't working at VCU, but I was a kid from Richmond paying attention to VCU go from the first four and then run through all of these big name programs to go to the Final Four. Like, and so that change to get the smaller people more opportunities worked. But I think the criticism is for the new CFP is like it's a similar approach, but it just didn't work. And it looked and it like it the opposite of worked, it like turned out really bad. Like not
Yeah,
only
right.
who we worked to get in, not like do well, they like got beat pretty.
Blown out.
So
Yeah.
but to your other point about I know we want to have this conversation about some of the negative commentary during these games. I mean, as someone who didn't like again who didn't have any dogs in the fight, like I would appreciate, and as someone who like we have experience like working with student athletes, so you know the to see the articles that talked so much about how negative some of the coverage was, like of the commentating during the game, like it's still a bunch of 18 to 24, 5-year olds who like really worked really hard to get to that point. Like let's not steal this moment from them and make it as negative. Like it's bad enough they got beat, but like let's give them credit. Let's not just focus on I don't know. I know there's a lot of things at stake. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of money involved, but at the same time, like give them credit for having a good season. Whether or not they deserve to be there, it's not really up to you.
True. Right. Like if it was up to you, you would have been in the committee and then maybe the field would have been different or whatever. Um, yeah. I don't know. I just don't think nobody likes hearing somebody talk shit about their team. So like you're alienating fans when you talk like that about the people who are watching the game because like probably half the people are fans of one of the teams. When you're talking shit, you're like turning them off of you personally, but probably honestly also like the channel that you're representing, being ESPN in this case. Um, but also like in general, nobody's like if you're not a fan of either team and you're tuning in to watch the game, you're tuning in to watch the game because you think it's gonna be good football. So when you're talking shit about the product on the field, like that also like you're trying to sell the product and at the same time you're bashing it. It just doesn't make sense to me from like any perspective.
Yep. And one thing I also want to mention before we wrap this conversation up is just initially I thought about like giving them a hard time and saying, well, they're talking about student athletes, but like at the same time, maybe they feel more comfortable being critical of these kids because they're getting paid now.
To be honest, I don't think they're thinking that hard. Like, I really don't think these men are capable of that much empathy. If I'm being so for real. Um, on that note, an event that happened Saturday that I think had like the completely opposite vibe that people were hype about and like felt very positive and like inspirational was USC UConn women's basketball game. So like rematch of JuJu and Paige, which made for a great game.
It was a great game. Like I said, my Saturday was planned around this game. I didn't even realize there was NFL games until maybe 12:30 on Saturday, which was cool.
Mhm.
Um, I added Ravens Steelers to the to-do list, but the only thing on the to-do list on Saturday was Juju and Paige. I was super excited about it. Um, and like you said, it was a great game, which helps. Like that helps a lot. That is very important. All of the hype that we're talking about for the game of basketball, women's sports, and those two teams in particular, the fact that it was a good game is very important to this story.
That my favorite thing to come of this, there was a lot that went on. There were like the Nike and Together collab. There's the like some new sponsorships announced. But the thing that I saw a lot of was Juju's statement where she said, "If you give women a platform, when you give women a platform, we're going to perform," which is just so epic of her to say as a woman. Like gives me like chills kind of every time I read it. And I think it like sums up so much of what's happened in women's sports lately. Like they're getting attention and then they're living up to the hype. That's exactly what you just said. Like there was all this attention on this game and hype for this game, and then it turned out to be a good game. And that's like the whole point. And pretty much the polar opposite of a couple of the CFP games. So
I really want to make sure to give credit to like shout out. We got to shout out my boy Chris Grossi, who's at UConn now.
mm,
But just the fact that the first half of the game was so one-sided for USC and fans didn't leave. Like there was no, okay, like we're done here. It's 8 o'clock on Saturday. Kids are gonna
also the
party.
players didn't check out either.
Right. So the second half was great basketball. Like like some of the best basketball I've seen all year. I mean, all season. This season. Like I saw great basketball last season, but this season so far. And I'm talking
Um,
about college, men's or women's, or pro, men's or women's.
you're saying you haven't seen a lot of good basketball season?
I'm saying that was just one of the best games I've seen
Yeah, okay, okay.
this season.
You know what we completely collectively forgot about, which I thought was great basketball, was the Olympics.
Yes, I actually
We
did.
all forgot that that happened, and there was some great basketball over the summer. Anyway, okay, back to the topic. I want to talk about the Together and Nike collab because I thought this was really cool. Together is the brand that did the Everyone Watches Women's Sports shirts that everyone's wearing, um, which obviously like I love and I've loved. Um, and that has become such a trend in like such a huge thing over the last 6 or 8 months. Um, and so for Nike to capitalize on that and do a collab shoe at this game specifically and like launch this collab or announce it or whatever at this game, I think it was like so smart from all sides. And then the shoe itself is also just like cute shoe. I like it. Which matters when you're marketing to women. Um, so like I don't know, I thought this was so well done from all sides.
Yep. The shoe is cool to have that type of opportunity for a brand activation like that. It's got to like have a lot of things going in the right direction together, right? Like having the two stars on both teams, having that game be a rematch from last year, but both of the teams and both of the superstars being Nike, like a lot of things were just no-brainers for this to be the time and the opportunity for them to have that collab and to have it showcased at this game for sure.
Yep. Um, Similar note, you noted the JuJu State Farm ad,
Yeah,
which
so whenever like I don't know, do you watch regular cable or do you stream it? Like do you have
I've Hulu Live, yeah.
so
So
I
I
got
think the ads we get might differ.
so I got a Roku, so I'm watching the game on the Fox Sports app on Roku. So I mean, crazy technology, everyone's ad experience is probably different. Like every household is probably different because it can be so specific and tailored to, you know, you as a user. But I saw the State Farm ad. I'm sure you saw it at least one time, right? Do you remember
I
seeing
just don't remember. I don't know.
because that being a national one, I'm sure they probably tried to push it out like in a major way, but overall, I thought it was well done. I thought like anytime you have athletes in those, like it can always be hit or miss depending on the personality of the athlete. And Juju is actually pretty quiet. Like she's pretty low key, but she's had interviews and talked about how she's trying to get used to being in the spotlight and kind of owning that moment.
She's also so young. Like we forget that last year was her freshman season. She's
Right,
probably like barely 19.
right. So
Like, that's a lot of pressure for a 19-year-old.
ton of pressure. And when you compare that to last year was the first year they did an NIL deal and they did it with Caitlin. And Caitlin Clark was a senior. So she was obviously had been through this and had been in the spotlight for a couple years now, longer than that. But um shout out just one the point of this is just to shout out State Farm for investing in the women's game, in women's sports in general, by having that activation with Caitlin last year, doing it with Juju this year. They've also got deals with the Unrivaled Women's Basketball League that's starting. So it's very important to them. They actually had a quote in an article I read on CNBC that said the company has found that TV spots featuring Caitlin Clark were 46% more effective in driving consumer engagement than the average State Farm ad, according to analytics from EDO. And I have no idea what EDO is. State Farm saw an additional 28% boost in effectiveness when the spots aired during Caitlin's Iowa Hawkeye games. So putting the numbers behind it, it works.
100%. And me ever being the data girl, I have to add. Um, on a related note, so Ally Financial, Ally like bank or something, they were the first, they pledged in 2022 to commit 50% of their sponsorship dollars to women's sports by 2027. And they were the first to do that. Other companies have now joined in that. And I think the reason that other Lord Almighty, I think the reason that other companies have joined in that is um, in their first year, I found these stats that say Ally saw an increase of 20% in brand performance. I don't know what exactly they're measuring there. 13% increase in brand likability and a 40% increase in brand consideration as a result of their investment in women's sports, like sponsorship of women's sports. So, that they being kind of like a trend setter a little bit here, having set that commitment in 2022, clearly saw results. State Farm is clearly seeing results. So it makes sense that we're seeing like more and more companies following suit here.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That's all you had to say. All right. Well, that's all we've got for this week.
What's
Some
the
cool.
what's the next big game for? I'm interested to see what the next big game is in the women's schedule this year. I mean, the big teams have already played each other, like Notre Dame and UConn have played, USC and Notre Dame have played. I mean, probably you won't get a UConn and South Carolina.
Let's look. And it was interesting because all the big games, like the big rivalries, are not like conference rivalries necessarily. Um, let's see what ESPN says.
Yeah, because South Carolina and UCLA have already played.
Yeah, I mean, conference play will start. I don't know.
LSU still good.
Sorry,
LSU still good.
I have no idea.
Mm,
Yeah, they're ranked six.
okay. But yes, USC has to play LSU at least once, maybe twice. So that'll be good. I mean, in the Big East, there's nobody else in the Big East that's competing with UConn, Notre Dame's in the ACC. So Notre Dame probably has to play. I mean, Duke was in the top 10, but they had a tough loss this weekend. So
There's a Michigan USC game next week. Michigan's ranked. Both teams are ranked. So that'll be a top 25 matchup.
Michigan's playing who? Oh, US, like, oh, playing JuJu.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always
Um,
confusing to me that people say USC and they mean South Carolina. To me, that is always Southern Cal. But I'm looking at South Carolina right now. That's why I was confused. But just want to make sure that everyone's clear that I know what the real USC is.
that's fair. That's fair. I don't know what though. At least from what I know of, everyone just calls both USC. But you're right, like it's confusing and it's dumb. And I think the true USC is Cal, but
All right.
interesting.
All right, Jules. Well, you have an interesting, exciting holiday plan, which we'll talk about next week. Um, little NFL football. I
Everyone's gonna watch Beyonce on Wednesday.
I gotta do some serious planning for Wednesday. Like
You might have to do like two TV setup or like laptop on the coffee table TV setup or something.
it's the I don't even really I mean the football games are who? It's Pittsburgh and Steelers. I mean Pittsburgh's and Chiefs, right?
And then
Texans and who else?
Texans and
Ravens. Because the teams that
Mhm.
played Saturday swapped. That's what it was. So it'd be easy scheduling them. Did you catch that? I caught that.
I caught that because if we want to talk about this, a lot of the players are saying have something to say about the fact that they're playing three games in 10 days.
Crazy.
Which is pretty absurd.
Crazy.
Not everybody, but like the Chiefs are, I think maybe the Ravens are, or something like that, which is probably not super safe considering like how physical football is. So I did catch that. That's why they played Saturday instead of Sunday, so they at least had like an extra day before playing again Wednesday. But
That's still quick.
it's a quick turnaround, and then to play again the next weekend is a lot.
We'll see. All right, Jules. Have a good holiday. Everybody listening and watching, just be prepared for an in-depth analysis of the Beyonce halftime by me. Because Jules will be in the car on the way back from actually being at the game for the Chiefs and Steelers. But happy holidays,
I'm,
Jules.
I'm gonna try to watch, but all right, yeah. Merry Christmas.
All right. Be safe. What's the temperature gonna be in gonna be cold. I hope you have a real coat, Jules. All right.
It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be low 40s, and I've been preparing for weeks because I don't do well with the cold. So I'm
Fine.
prepared.
That's not that bad. That's not bad.
No, no.
You'll be fine. All right.
I mean, it's like 6 degrees in Buffalo this past weekend, so it's nothing compared to that.
That's rough. Okay.
All right.
Have fun.
Goodbye.